Ma'am, step out of the vehicle, now.
Is there a problem, officer?
This car is registered to County Fleet. I need you to explain what you're doing in it.
That vehicle was assigned to me. I'm the incoming chief of police. My reserved spot is the one I'm currently parked in.
I'm going to need you to step out of the vehicle, ma'am.
She stepped out. Slowly. Deliberately. And while Officer Walter Croteau spent the next 22 minutes treating her like a criminal in a parking lot she owned, she said nothing she didn't need to say. She showed him her ID. She showed him the fleet assignment form with her name on it. She stood in the October morning air in her charcoal blazer while two city employees walked past and recognized her immediately. He still didn't let her go. What Officer Walter Croteau did not know, what he would spend the rest of his career wishing he had taken 30 seconds to look up, was that the woman standing beside that GMC Yukon was 4 days away from being sworn in as the chief of police of Hargrove County. His department. His chain of command. The person whose signature would appear at the top of his personnel file. He found out on Friday. At her swearing-in ceremony. On the news. With 11 million other people. Before we go any further, what city or country are you watching from? Drop it in the comments. We love seeing where this community tunes in from. And if you believe a black woman should never have to prove she belongs in her own parking spot, like this video and subscribe. Let's get into the full story. The Hargrove County Civic Center sits on the corner of Aldridge Boulevard and 5th Street, a wide limestone building with 3 flagpoles out front and a parking lot that wraps around the east side. On Tuesday mornings, it fills up slowly, administrative staff filtering in between 8 and 9, council members arriving by 9:30, and the occasional visiting official pulling into one of the reserved spots near the main entrance. The reserved spot closest to the east entrance door had a small green sign in front of it. It read, Chief of Police, Reserved. That sign had been there for 11 days, placed after the formal announcement of Dr. Renata Okafor's appointment. Her predecessor, Chief Harold Vance, had retired after 31 years and had been quietly cleaning out his office since the first of the month. Dr. Renata Okafor was 47 years old, and she had spent the last 22 of those years building a career that most people in law enforcement administration would have called extraordinary. She held a doctorate in criminal justice policy from Georgetown. She had spent 8 years as a deputy commissioner in a major metropolitan department, overseeing reform of use of force protocols that had been cited by the Department of Justice as a national model. She had been recruited to lead the Hargrove County Department specifically because of that work, because the county council had spent 2 years looking for someone who could modernize an aging department, while maintaining community trust. She had accepted the offer in September. Her official start date was that Friday. On this particular Tuesday, she had come in early. Not because she was required to, she wasn't officially sworn in yet, but because that was who she was. She had a meeting with the outgoing chief's administrative team at 10 o'clock, a walkthrough of the department's record systems at noon, and a 2 o'clock briefing with the county manager. She had arrived at 8:52, pulled into her reserved spot in the black GMC Yukon that had been assigned to her by the city fleet office 3 days earlier, and sat for a moment with the engine idling. She was reviewing notes on her phone. Department staffing numbers. Open internal affairs cases. Pending union negotiations. The kind of reading that doesn't wait for your first official day. She had been sitting there for approximately 6 minutes when she heard the knock. Officer Walter Croteau was 31 years old, 7 years on the force, assigned to the Civic Center patrol beat that Tuesday because 2 other officers had called in sick. It was not a beat he worked regularly. He knew the building. He did not know every vehicle that belonged in its parking lot. He did not, evidently, know about the new chief's reserved spot or the GMC Yukon assigned to her. He had seen the vehicle when he pulled in. Black Yukon, municipal plates, engine running, single occupant. He had run the plates, which was reasonable, and the result had come back registered to Hargrove County Fleet. What he did with that information was where things went wrong. A vehicle registered to County Fleet, sitting in a parking lot with a running engine and an occupant, is not a suspicious vehicle. It is a government vehicle being used by someone with access to government vehicles. That is the entire and complete explanation 99 times out of 100. Officer Croteau arrived at a different conclusion. He later told investigators he had assumed the vehicle might be stolen because the woman inside didn't match his expectation of someone who would be using a county fleet vehicle on a Tuesday morning. He parked his cruiser behind the Yukon, partially blocking it in. He approached the driver's window and knocked twice. Dr. Okafor lowered the window. "Ma'am, I need you to step out of the vehicle." She looked at him. Calm. Measured. The particular stillness of a woman who has navigated rooms full of people who underestimated her for 22 years. "Good morning, officer. Is there a problem? This vehicle is registered to County Fleet. I need to see some identification, and I need you to explain what you're doing in this car." She held his gaze for a moment. "My name is Dr. Renata Okafor. This vehicle was assigned to me by the City Fleet Office. I'm the incoming Chief of Police. My reserved spot is the one I'm currently parked in." Croteau didn't move. He looked at the car, looked at her, looked at his notepad. "I'm going to need to see some ID, ma'am. And I'm going to need you to step out of the vehicle. I've told you who I am. You're welcome to verify that through dispatch or through the administrative office, which is 30 feet behind you. Ma'am, I'm not going to ask you again to step out of the vehicle." Dr. Okafor paused. Then, slowly and deliberately, she put down her phone, unclipped her seatbelt, and opened the door. She stepped out of the vehicle. She was wearing a charcoal blazer, pressed slacks, and the kind of quiet composure that had nothing to do with what she was choosing to show and everything to do with what she was choosing not to. "I have identification in my bag. I am going to reach for it. I am telling you this before I do it." She produced her state-issued ID. She also produced, because she had learned long ago that documentation was the only language some conversations understood, a printed copy of the fleet assignment form she had received 3 days earlier. Her name, her title, the vehicle's VIN, the fleet office signature. Croteau took both. He looked at the fleet form. He looked at the ID. He looked at her. "This form doesn't have an official seal. It's a fleet assignment form, officer. It's not a notarized document. It's internal paperwork. You can call the fleet office and confirm. I'm going to need you to stay right here while I call this in." "I understand." She stood beside the vehicle in the October morning air, in full view of the Civic Center's main entrance, while Officer Croteau walked back to his cruiser and got on the radio. What happened next lasted 22 minutes. 22 minutes of standing outside her own assigned vehicle, in her own reserved parking space, outside the building she was 4 days away from leading. During those 22 minutes, 2 city employees walked past and recognized her. One of them, a records administrator named Pat Huang, who had been at the welcoming reception for Dr. Okafor 2 weeks earlier, stopped and asked if everything was all right. Croteau told him to keep moving. A second officer arrived at minute 8. Croteau had called for backup. The second officer, Sergeant Diana Ferris, pulled into the lot, got out, and walked to where Croteau was standing. She looked at Dr. Okafor. She looked at the reserved sign. She looked at Croteau. Her expression shifted in a way that Croteau would later describe as not particularly supportive. "Croteau, what is happening here? Vehicle came back County Fleet, occupant couldn't produce verification. The sign behind you says Chief of Police Reserved. She doesn't have an official ID card yet." "Croteau." Sergeant Ferris said his name with the weight of a woman who has been in law enforcement for 16 years and has watched this exact scenario play out before. "Tell me you ran the name she gave you." He had not run the name she gave him. Sergeant Ferris turned to Dr. Okafor. "Ma'am, I apologize for the delay. Can you confirm your name for me?" "Dr. Renata Okafor. Chief Designate, Hargrove County Police Department. Official start date is Friday." Ferris typed the name into her car's terminal. What came up was the county's own press release from 5 weeks earlier, complete with a photograph, announcing Dr. Okafor's appointment. It was the same press release that had run in the local paper, that had been distributed to every department division, that had been pinned to the bulletin board in the officer break room. Sergeant Ferris closed her eyes for exactly 1 second. Then she opened them. Officer Croteau, return to your vehicle. She walked to Dr. Okafor. Chief Okafor, I am deeply sorry. This should not have happened. I'm Sergeant Diana Ferris, District 4. I want to be very clear that what Officer Croteau did here today is not something I can defend and not something this department should ask you to overlook. Dr. Okafor looked at her for a moment. I appreciate that, Sergeant. I'd like you to document this fully. Badge number, time, every exchange. Yes, ma'am. And I want your incident report submitted by end of day. Understood. Dr. Okafor picked up her bag from the hood of the Yukon where she had placed it. She straightened her blazer. She looked at Officer Croteau, who was standing near his cruiser, not speaking. She didn't say anything to him. She didn't need to. She turned and walked into the building. Before we go further, have you or someone you know ever been questioned, stopped, or accused of something simply because of how you look, or where you were? Drop your experience in the comments. This community sees you, and your story matters. And if you believe that black women in positions of leadership should never be made to justify their presence in their own workplace, share this video. It matters that this story reaches people who need to hear it. There is a particular kind of silence that fills an administrative building when the person who was just publicly humiliated in the parking lot is the person about to run the department. By 10:15, the story had moved through the Civic Center the way stories move through buildings full of people who pay attention, quietly, quickly, and completely. The records administrator, Pat Huang, had told the story to 2 colleagues before he reached his desk. Sergeant Ferris had filed a preliminary incident note before she left the parking lot. The county manager's executive assistant, a 30-year veteran of city government named Gloria Espinoza, had seen Dr. Okafor walk through the main entrance with the look of someone who had just navigated something they shouldn't have had to navigate, and had quietly asked if she needed anything. A cup of coffee in a few minutes, Dr. Okafor had said. Then we'll get started. Gloria had brought the coffee. She had also, before the morning was over, mentioned the incident to the county manager, David Cho, who had been in the building since 8 o'clock and who had, apparently, missed the parking lot event entirely. His reaction, by multiple accounts, was a silence that lasted longer than comfortable, and was followed by a very quiet, "Get me Officer Croteau's supervisor." The meeting at 10 o'clock proceeded as scheduled. Dr. Okafor sat at the head of the conference table and walked through her transition agenda with the administrative team with the same focused precision she had applied to every department she had ever managed. If any of what had happened in the parking lot was still visible on her face, no one in that room could find it. But Sergeant Ferris's incident report landed on the desk of Captain Miriam Osei at 11:45. Captain Osei read it once. Then she read it again. Then she called her lieutenant, who called the deputy superintendent, who called David Cho's office, and by 1 o'clock that afternoon, Officer Walter Croteau had been summoned to a meeting that he had not been told was coming. The Internal Affairs investigation opened the same day. What it found, over the following 2 weeks, was a picture that was larger than one parking lot and one Tuesday morning. Croteau's personnel file contained 2 prior complaints, both from black civilians. One was a traffic stop where the driver had alleged that Croteau had detained him for 40 minutes despite having no probable cause beyond the driver's race and neighborhood. The complaint had been reviewed and closed with a finding of insufficient evidence. The second was a welfare check that 3 witnesses said had escalated into a near arrest of a black homeowner who had been gardening in front of his own house. That complaint had also been closed. Neither had resulted in any formal action, any remedial training, or any note in Croteau's file beyond the complaint itself. The Internal Affairs investigators also pulled Croteau's radio and body camera footage from that morning. The body camera footage showed the full 22 minutes of the parking lot encounter in high definition. It showed Dr. Okafor producing her identification immediately. It showed her calmly explaining her identity, her role, and the vehicle assignment. It showed Croteau declining to run her name for 17 minutes after she gave it to him. And it showed, in the corner of the frame, the reserved sign, Chief of Police, Reserved, clearly visible from the moment Croteau stepped out of his cruiser. The footage was viewed by the county manager's office, the police oversight board, and the county's legal team within 48 hours. It was also, and this is where the story became something the department could not contain, leaked. Not by Dr. Okafor's team, not by Internal Affairs, and not by Sergeant Ferris. It was leaked by a civilian employee in the administrative office who had heard the story, who had seen Pat Huang's account of the encounter, and who had made a decision about what the public deserved to know. By Thursday morning, the body camera footage was on social media. By Thursday evening, it had 4 million views. By Friday, the day Dr. Renata Okafor was officially sworn in as Chief of Police of Hargrove County, it had 11 million. The swearing-in ceremony had been planned for 6 weeks. It was scheduled for 10 o'clock Friday morning in the county commission chambers, a high-ceiling room with wooden benches and a portrait of every county executive dating back to 1887. 50 seats had been set aside for invited guests. The county manager was there. 7 of the 9 county commissioners were there. Representatives from the police union, from community organizations, from the Georgetown Alumni Association, from 2 federal agencies whose personnel had worked alongside Dr. Okafor on reform initiatives over the years. What nobody had planned for was the crowd outside. By 9:30, there were 300 people on the sidewalk in front of the Civic Center. By 10, it was closer to 500. They had come because of the footage. They had come because the woman standing inside that building, preparing to take an oath of office, had spent 22 minutes being treated like a criminal in her own parking lot, and had walked into the building anyway and done the work. They held signs. Most of them were handmade. One read, "She showed up anyway." Another, "Chief Okafor, we see you." A third, held by an older woman near the front of the crowd, "My daughter watched this and said she wants to be a police chief." Inside, Dr. Okafor stood before the county judge and placed her hand on the Constitution. The commissioners had offered, privately, to acknowledge the incident formally in the ceremony. She had declined. "Today is about the work," she had told David Cho the evening before. "It's not about what happened in the parking lot. The parking lot is a symptom. The ceremony should be about the department we're going to build." She was sworn in at 10:14. The room gave her a standing ovation that lasted 94 seconds. Outside, someone who had live-streamed the ceremony on a phone held up against the window told the crowd what was happening, and the crowd made a sound that carried through the limestone walls and into the chamber. She smiled, a private, steady smile, and thanked the judge. Then she turned to face the room. "I have spent 22 years in law enforcement," she said. "I came to this work because I believe that the relationship between police and community is one of the most important relationships a society can get right, and one of the most costly to get wrong. I have seen it done wrong. I have worked to help departments do it better. And I am here today because this community chose someone who would not pretend that the gap between those two things closes on its own." She paused. "I will not speak today about what happened Tuesday morning. What I will say is this. No one should have to carry the weight of being questioned about their right to exist in a space, not in a parking lot, not in a boardroom, not in a courtroom, not on a sidewalk. The work of this department, beginning today, is to make sure that we are never the institution that puts that weight on someone. That is not a political statement. It is the only version of this job worth doing." The room was quiet in a way that rooms get quiet when something true has just been said aloud. "Let's get to work," she said. Officer Walter Croteau was suspended with pay pending the outcome of the Internal Affairs investigation. The investigation concluded 23 days after the incident. The findings were unambiguous. Croteau had violated department policy on the initiation of investigative stops, having no articulable reasonable suspicion to approach the vehicle. He had failed to run the subject's name through available databases despite being provided with her identity, a failure the investigation described as a deliberate choice rather than an oversight. He had made a false statement in his initial incident report, describing Dr. Okafor as uncooperative, despite body camera footage that showed the opposite. And the investigation, reviewing his prior personnel file alongside the new incident, found sufficient basis to conclude that his pattern of stops targeting black civilians constituted a violation of the department's anti-discrimination policy. He was terminated. The findings cited all 4 violations. There was no appeal filed within the 30-day window. He was 31 years old with 7 years of service and, according to the investigation, 2 prior complaints that should have triggered remediation years earlier and didn't. The department that had cleared those complaints, filed them, and done nothing did not offer Croteau a public defense. It offered instead a separate statement acknowledging that the complaint review process had failed to identify a pattern that should have been identified and that this failure bore responsibility for what had occurred on Tuesday. That statement was not comfortable to issue. Chief Okafor had required it anyway. Croteau didn't build this in a vacuum, she told her command staff in a closed meeting 3 days after the termination. He built it in a department that looked at 2 complaints, saw something, and chose not to act on it. If we don't own that, we will build the next one. She had also, by that point, already begun the structural work. New guidelines for fleet vehicle and reserved parking recognition, distributed to all officers. A revised complaint review protocol that required supervisory sign-off whenever a second complaint against the same officer was filed. A mandatory 40-hour bias and procedural justice training block, not as a remediation measure for individual officers but as a standing requirement for every officer in the department, every 2 years. The police union pushed back on the training requirement. Chief Okafor met with the union leadership for 3 hours. She did not remove the training requirement. She expanded the curriculum based on feedback from the meeting and added a union representative to the design committee. "I'm not here to fight the union," she said afterward. "I'm here to build a department that the community can trust and that officers can be proud of. Those things are not in opposition. The training stays." The day after the swearing-in, a letter arrived at the Civic Center addressed to Dr. Renata Okafor, Chief of Police. It was from a 12-year-old girl named Amara, who had watched the body camera footage with her mother, and then watched the ceremony live stream and then, apparently, written a letter by hand, found the building's address online, and mailed it. It read in part, "My mom told me that what happened to you in the parking lot was wrong and that some people decide who you are before they even talk to you. She said you went inside anyway and did your job. I want to be like that when I grow up. Can I come visit the department someday?" Chief Okafor's assistant, in consultation with the chief, wrote back within a week. The letter confirmed that yes, Amara was welcome to visit. It also invited her, if she was interested, to attend the department's next community open house. Amara attended with her mother. She shook the chief's hand. She was given a tour of the dispatch center. She asked 11 questions, several of which the dispatcher described as frankly better than the ones we get during official press tours. The visit was not publicized. There was no press release and no photo opportunity. Chief Okafor had been clear about that. She didn't write the letter for a photo, she said. She wrote it because something moved her. We honor that privately. The visit happened. It was real. That was enough. 3 months after the swearing-in, a reporter from the county paper asked Chief Okafor if she felt that what happened in the parking lot on that October Tuesday had changed anything. She thought about it. "Everything that needed to change was already on the table the day I was hired," she said. "The incident didn't reveal anything new. It made visible something that was already there. And that's important, because things that are visible can be addressed. Things that stay invisible, stay." She paused. "What I hope changed is not just policy. Policy changes can be reversed. What I hope changed is something harder to undo, the understanding inside this department that accountability applies to everyone, in every direction, including upward. That is the hardest thing to build in any institution. It requires people to trust that when they speak, something will actually happen. I spent Tuesday morning standing in a parking lot being treated like I didn't belong there. I walked into that building and did my job. I'm still here. That's the only answer I know how to give." She returned to the bench. She continued the work. She still parks in her reserved spot every morning, in the same space, under the same sign. Nobody has knocked on her window again. If this story moved you, share it. Share it with someone who needs to know that Black women lead, that dignity is not conditional, and that showing up anyway, again and again, through every parking lot and every waiting room and every moment someone looks at you and decides you don't fit, is one of the most powerful things a human being can do. What reforms would you demand from your city's police department after seeing a story like this? Drop them in the comments. And if you believe that every person, regardless of what they look like, deserves to arrive at their workplace without being questioned about whether they belong there, subscribe. We will keep telling these stories until the system has no choice but to change.